You still believe in rules, don't you? Noah said, leaning back in his chair in the conference room like a man who had just invented electricity. But he didn't know that the very rules I once built would become the noose around his neck. The small conference room at Stratusforge Systems headquarters in Austin felt colder than usual that morning. Or maybe it was just me, sensing what was coming. The glass walls that our marketing team loved to call transparency in action now felt like an aquarium where I was the spectacle of the day. Outside, life at the defense tech company continued as normal. Engineers hunched over keyboards, sales reps gesturing animatedly into headsets, the occasional burst of laughter from the break room. Inside, CEO Noah Whitaker was ending my 11-year career with the casual flick of his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. Emily, you've been great, really, but we're pivoting toward a more agile compliance structure, he said, not bothering to look up from his tablet. His fingers swiped through what I assumed were quarterly projections, or perhaps his fantasy football lineup. With Noah, it was hard to tell which held more of his attention. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, the way my grandmother had taught me when faced with rudeness. Agile compliance structure, I repeated. The corporate buzzwords tasted bitter. What exactly does that mean, Noah? He glanced up then, a flash of annoyance crossing his boyish features. At 36, Noah Whitaker was 11 years my junior and looked even younger with his carefully disheveled hair and startup casual wardrobe that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The board had brought him in 8 months ago after our Series D funding, impressed by his previous exits and his data-driven approach to scaling defense technology companies. It means we're streamlining, he said with practiced patience. Your department is heavy. Too many checkpoints, too many approval layers. We're losing deals because of processing times. I felt my spine stiffen. Those checkpoints exist because we work with the Pentagon. Defense contracts require... I know what they require. He cut in, waving his hand dismissively. But there are ways to optimize, to automate. Your methods are... traditional. Traditional. The way he said it made it sound like I was still using quill and parchment instead of the state-of-the-art compliance system I had built from scratch. A system that had passed 3 federal audits with 0 deficiencies. A system that had protected Stratusforge from the scandals that had taken down 2 of our competitors. The board supports this decision, he added, sliding a folder across the table. HR has prepared a separation package. 2 months severance, standard NDA. Your access will be terminated at end of day. I didn't touch the folder. Is this because of the Alpha Secure contract? Because I flagged the testing discrepancies? Something flickered across his face, a micro-expression of discomfort quickly masked. This isn't personal, Emily. It's structural. We're bringing in a younger team that understands modern compliance automation. Less human oversight, more algorithmic governance. You still need a qualified compliance officer to sign off on defense contracts. It's federal law. He smiled then, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. We found a workaround for that. Technology solutions, you know. That's what we do here. He glanced at his watch. Look, your contribution has been valued. But Stratusforge 2.0 is about velocity. We can't have bottlenecks. I was the bottleneck. 11 years reduced to a traffic metaphor. I remember the day I joined Stratusforge. Back then, we were 20 people in a renovated warehouse, and our server room doubled as document storage. The founder, Martin Reeves, hired me away from Lockheed to build a compliance framework that would allow us to bid on defense contracts. I need someone who knows the rules inside out, he'd said, because I sure as hell don't want to learn them. For over a decade, I had built those rules, layer by layer, procedure by procedure. I had trained every new hire, reviewed every contract, certified every compliance checkpoint. When the DoD inspectors came through, they'd joke that I knew Title 48 better than they did. When we landed our first 8-figure contract, Martin had popped champagne in my cramped office and said, Emily, you built the foundation that makes everything else possible. Martin retired 3 years ago, and now here I was, being ushered out by a CEO who saw rules as obstacles to be optimized away. "I'll need you to sign the NDA before you leave," Noah said, tapping the folder. I finally picked it up, but didn't open it. "And if I don't?" He blinked, genuinely surprised by the question. "It's standard procedure. Emily, you helped write it, if I recall." "I did," I confirmed. "Along with the whistleblower protection clauses and the federal disclosure exemptions, I know exactly what's in it." A slight tension appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Is that a problem?" "Just ironic," I said softly. "You're firing the compliance officer but insisting on compliance with the separation agreement." He leaned forward, his friendly mask slipping. "Look, I'm trying to make this easy. Don't turn it into something ugly." I stood up, tucking the folder into my bag without opening it. "I'll have my lawyer review it." "Emily," his voice hardened, "this isn't negotiable. The terms are standard." "Then you have nothing to worry about, do you?" I shouldered my bag and headed for the door. "Your system access ends at 5, he called after me. "Make sure anything personal is cleared out by then." I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. Everything I built here belongs to the company, Noah. That was always understood. What wasn't understood, what Noah Whitaker couldn't possibly comprehend in his rush to optimize everything, was just how thoroughly I had built those systems, how deeply the verification protocols were embedded, how carefully I had designed the authentication chains that couldn't be broken without leaving digital evidence scattered like bloodstains at a crime scene. 3 months ago, when Noah had demanded we streamline the contract verification system, I had insisted on building in a Level 1 authentication protocol, the highest security tier, requiring multi-factor verification tied to specific credentials. My credentials. "This is overkill," Noah had complained during the implementation meeting. "We need to move faster, not add more layers." "It's not optional for ITAR compliance," I had explained patiently. "Defense regulations require it for contracts over a certain threshold." He had signed the authorization without reading the technical specifications. "Just get it done," he'd muttered. "All this paperwork is just formality anyway." I cleared out my office methodically that afternoon. 11 years of professional life packed into 2 cardboard boxes. Personal photos, industry awards, the ceremonial pen from our first Pentagon contract signing. My team, I still thought of them as my team, stopped by one to say awkward goodbyes. Most avoided eye contact. Survivors in a corporate culling always do. Julian from IT hovered in my doorway, last, his lanky frame seeming more hunched than usual. "They've got me doing the system lockout at 5, he said quietly. "I tried to get someone else to do it, but—" "It's okay, Jules," I assured him. "Just doing your job." He stepped inside and closed the door. "This is wrong. Everyone knows it." I shrugged. Noah wants his own people. He's been bringing in consultants from his last company. They don't understand our systems. They keep asking for backdoor access to the verification protocols. I kept my face neutral. "Follow the documented procedures, Julian. Everything is there for a reason." He gave me a searching look. "The Level 1 authentication for major contracts? That's tied to your credentials, isn't it?" I handed him a framed photo from my desk. "Would you mind wrapping this in some paper before I pack it? I'd hate for it to break." Julian got the message. He took the photo, carefully wrapping it in printer paper before returning it to me. "Take care of yourself, Emily." At precisely 4:59 p.m., I walked out of Stratusforge Systems headquarters carrying my 2 boxes. I didn't look back at the glass and steel building that had been my professional home for over a decade. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply placed the boxes in the trunk of my Volvo, got in the driver's seat, and drove away. I hadn't signed the NDA. And I knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had designed the system herself, that sooner or later, Noah Whitaker would try to bypass the Level 1 authentication protocol I had built. When that happened, the security triggers I'd embedded would activate, creating an unalterable audit trail. All I had to do was wait. The weeks after my termination passed in a gray haze. I went through the motions of job searching, but my heart wasn't in it. Compliance officers weren't in high demand in Austin's tech scene. Too many startups viewing regulatory compliance as an afterthought. Too many established companies looking for younger, cheaper alternatives who wouldn't push back against corner cutting. My savings gave me some runway, but not indefinitely. By the third month, I had downgraded my expectations from equivalent position to pays the bills. That's how I ended up as a part-time librarian assistant at Travis Hill Public Library, helping seniors navigate email and teenagers find research materials. 20 hours a week at $18 an hour, a far cry from my six-figure compliance director salary. You're overqualified, the library director had said during my interview, peering at me over reading glasses. I'm looking for a change of pace, I had replied, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. Less stress. There was a certain peace in the library, I had to admit. Books followed their own kind of compliance, ordered, categorized, following clear rules of organization. When I helped elderly patrons recover forgotten passwords or showed middle schoolers how to cite sources properly, I felt a faint echo of my former professional self. Rules still mattered here, even if in a smaller context. Sometimes I would check Stratusforge's website, reading press releases and scanning for any signs of trouble. They had announced a new compliance automation initiative 2 weeks after my departure. NOAA's LinkedIn page boasted about revolutionizing regulatory technology and cutting approval times by 60%. I wondered if the DoD contracting officers were as impressed by these metrics as his venture capital friends seemed to be. In my darkest moments, usually around 3 a.m. when sleep eluded me, I questioned whether I had made a mistake, not in building the authentication safeguards, those were necessary and proper, but in not fighting harder to stay. Should I have warned the board about NOAA's cavalier attitude toward compliance? Should I have documented my concerns more explicitly? Or was I simply experiencing the bitter aftertaste of professional rejection, my ego wounded by being discarded so easily? 4 months and 6 days after my termination, my phone buzzed with a text message while I was reshelving books in the library's reference section. Emily, it's Julian. Do you have a minute to talk? Not about work exactly, but professional advice maybe. I stared at the message, my heart suddenly pounding. Julian had been with Stratusforge for 7 years. He rarely reached out to anyone outside of work matters. Sure, on break-in 15-minute call then, I texted back. When my break came, I sat in my car in the library parking lot and called Julian's number. Emily, thanks for calling back. His voice sounded strained. Everything okay, Jules? A pause. Not really, things have been tense here lately. There's an issue with the contract system. I kept my voice neutral. What kind of issue? The Level 1 authentication protocols keep rejecting approvals for the Penumbra project. It's a big DoD contract. And NOAA is, well, he's losing it. He's had us trying to override the system for 3 days straight. The Penumbra project. I had initiated the preliminary compliance framework for it just before my termination. A $22 million Pentagon contract for cybersecurity infrastructure. Exactly the kind of high-security contract that would trigger the Level 1 authentication requirements. What exactly is happening with the authentication? I asked carefully. That's the thing, Julian said, lowering his voice. The system is saying the authorization signature is invalid, but NOAA insists he signed off properly. He's had IT and 3 outside consultants trying to force it through, but nothing works. Yesterday he fired the new compliance team lead on the spot, claimed she had sabotaged the system. I closed my eyes, picturing the chaos. And they haven't found the issue. The audit logs show, well, they show your authentication credentials were used, Emily, after your termination date, but the system rejected them as fraudulent. There it was. NOAA had tried to use my credentials to approve the contract, or more likely, had tried to override the system to make it appear I had approved it before leaving. But the time-stamped verification protocols I had built had caught the discrepancy and locked down the process. That sounds like a serious problem, I said carefully. Emily. Julian's voice dropped even lower. Did you, before you left, did you? I built the system according to federal compliance standards. Julian. If something isn't working properly, I suggest a full audit by an independent third party. That's the protocol. A long silence followed. Then, Noah won't allow that. He's talking about scrapping the entire system and starting over. But we have 3 active DoD contracts that would be compromised. The board is asking questions now. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see Stratusforge fail. Too many good people worked there. Julian, you should document everything you're being asked to do, for your own protection. Yeah, he sighed. I've started doing that. Listen, I should go. If anyone knew I called you. I understand. Take care of yourself. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing. The system had worked exactly as designed. Noah had tried to forge a level 1 authentication, my authentication, and the security protocols had caught it, creating an immutable record of the attempt. Now he was trapped. He couldn't approve the contract without proper authorization, couldn't explain why he had tried to use my credentials, and couldn't dismantle the system without jeopardizing existing contracts. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness. This wouldn't bring my career back. It wouldn't undo the dismissive way Noah had ended 11 years of dedicated work. It was cold comfort, at best. I went back to shelving books, trying to push Stratusforge from my mind. Whatever happened now was beyond my control. 1 week later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. The return address made my stomach tighten. Office of the Inspector General, Department of Defense. Inside was a formal request for an interview regarding potential irregularities in contract approval processes at Stratusforge Systems. A DoD investigator named Daniel Mercer wanted to speak with me about the Penumbra project authentication protocols and the use of my credentials after my termination date. I called the number provided and scheduled the interview for the following day. That night, I barely slept. I wasn't worried about my own actions. I had done nothing wrong. But I was acutely aware that my carefully constructed system had now triggered a federal investigation that could have serious consequences for Stratusforge and for Noah personally. The next morning, I met Investigator Mercer at a downtown federal building. He was a gray-haired man with the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades untangling complicated messes. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Donovan, he said, gesturing me to a seat in a sparse interview room. I understand you were previously the compliance director at Stratusforge Systems. Yes, until 4 months ago. He nodded, consulting his notes. And you designed their contract compliance system, correct? Specifically, the Level 1 authentication protocols for defense contracts? I did, I confirmed. It was implemented to ensure compliance with DFAR's requirements for controlled unclassified information. Mercer looked up from his notes. Can you explain in layman's terms what this system does and how it works? I took a deep breath and explained the authentication chain I had built, how it created unbreakable links between specific credentials, biometric markers, and time-stamped approvals, how it was designed to prevent exactly the kind of falsification that appeared to have been attempted. And these credentials were tied specifically to you? He asked. To my role as compliance director, yes. The system requires Level 1 authentication from a certified compliance officer for all contracts over $10 million or involving certain sensitive technologies. He made a note. We've received system logs showing that someone attempted to use your credentials to approve the Penumbra contract on May 17th, nearly 4 months after your employment ended. The system flagged this as fraudulent. Can you explain how that might have happened? I chose my words carefully. There are only 2 possibilities. Either someone was attempting to use my old credentials without authorization, or there was a catastrophic system failure. Given Stratusforge's security protocols, a system failure of that magnitude is unlikely. Mercer's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. Ms. Donovan, did you have any indication before your departure that someone might attempt to bypass proper authentication procedures? I met his gaze steadily. I was terminated rather abruptly. During my final weeks, I observed a shift in attitude toward compliance protocols under the new CEO. There seemed to be a preference for speed over security. Was that why you built these particular safeguards? I built them because they were necessary for proper federal compliance, I said firmly. Defense contracts require rigorous authentication. I designed a system that couldn't be circumvented without leaving evidence. Mercer nodded slowly. And that evidence has led us here. He closed his folder. Ms. Donovan, we've suspended Stratus Forge's contract processing pending our investigation. CEO Noah Whitaker has been asked to provide a full accounting of the authentication attempt. A chill ran through me. What happens now? That depends on what we find, Mercer said. Attempting to falsify federal contract approvals is a serious matter. If Mr. Whitaker personally attempted to use your credentials or directed others to do so, he could face charges. I hadn't intended things to go this far. I had built the system to enforce compliance, not to ensnare Noah in a federal investigation. Yet I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for him either. He had dismissed the rules as inconvenient obstacles. Now those same rules were holding him accountable. Is there anything else you need from me? I asked. Mercer handed me his card. Not at this time, but please remain available. We may have follow-up questions as the investigation proceeds. As I left the federal building, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made me stop in my tracks. Board meeting results, Stratus Forge Systems. It was from Martin Reeves, the retired founder. We had stayed in loose contact since his retirement, occasional lunch meetings and holiday cards. The message was brief. Emily, I've been called back to chair the board temporarily following today's emergency meeting. Noah Whitaker has been placed on administrative leave pending the DOD investigation. The board has authorized me to reach out to you regarding the compliance system situation and potential next steps. Are you available to meet tomorrow? Martin. Standing there on the sidewalk, I felt a dizzying collision of emotions. Vindication, anxiety, a strange sense of grief for the company I'd helped build, now in crisis. Most surprising was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose? I replied immediately, yes, I can meet tomorrow. Name the time and place. Martin suggested breakfast at a quiet restaurant away from the downtown tech corridor. When I arrived the next morning, he was already there, looking older than I remembered, but with the same shrewd eyes that had built Stratus Forge from nothing. Emily. He stood to greet me with a warm handshake. Thank you for coming. We exchanged brief pleasantries as we settled in and ordered coffee. Then Martin leaned forward, his expression grave. I owe you an apology, he said bluntly. I should have paid closer attention to what was happening after Noah came on board. The board was dazzled by his track record and his promises of accelerated growth. We didn't see, or didn't want to see, how he was dismantling the foundations. I appreciated his directness. Martin had never been one for corporate doublespeak. You weren't actively involved anymore. That was the point of retirement. He grimaced. Nevertheless, you built our compliance framework from nothing, and it deserved more respect than a casual dismissal. He sipped his coffee. The DOD investigation has created a serious situation. They've frozen all our defense contracts pending review. I heard, I said neutrally. The investigators showed us the logs. Noah tried to use your credentials to approve the Penumbra contract. When that failed, he attempted to override the system entirely. When that failed too, he ordered Julian to wipe the authentication logs. My eyes widened. Julian refused? Martin nodded. He documented the order and reported it to our general counsel, who took it to the board. That's when we called the emergency meeting. I felt a surge of pride in Julian. It took courage to stand up like that. The system worked exactly as designed. Martin continued. It caught an unauthorized attempt and created immutable evidence. Frankly, it's the only thing that saved us from potentially losing all our defense business. I'm glad, I said honestly. I never wanted Stratusforge to suffer. Just Noah. Martin finished with a knowing look. Can't say I blame you. The board has seen the termination records. The way he handled your departure was unnecessarily harsh. I shrugged. Business is business. No. Martin shook his head firmly. That's what Noah believed. That everything is just transactions and optimization. He never understood that defense contracts aren't just about moving fast and breaking things. There are lives on the other end of our systems. That's why compliance matters. He was right, of course. That's what Noah had never grasped. In the defense sector, cutting corners wasn't just about risk tolerance. It could mean mission failure or worse for the service members relying on our technology. Martin placed a folder on the table between us. The board has authorized me to offer you your position back. Compliance Director, reporting directly to the board, not to whoever becomes the next CEO. Full reinstatement of benefits and seniority, plus a compensation adjustment to reflect the inconvenience of the past few months. I stared at the folder but didn't open it. And Noah? Gone for good, Martin said firmly. The board voted unanimously to terminate him once we understood what had happened. The DoD investigation is still ongoing, but that's between Noah and the federal prosecutors now. Part of me wanted to reach for the folder immediately, to reclaim my role, my office, my carefully built systems, to walk back into Stratusforge, vindicated and restored. But another part hesitated. I need to think about it, I said finally. These past months have given me perspective. If I come back, there would need to be structural changes. Real board oversight of compliance, not just lip service. Martin nodded, unsurprised. I expected you'd say that. Take the weekend to review the offer. We can discuss specific terms on Monday. As we finished our breakfast, Martin looked at me thoughtfully. You know, when I hired you 11 years ago, I told you I needed someone who knew the rules inside out. I remember. What I didn't say then was that I also needed someone who would stand by those rules even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. He smiled slightly. Your authentication system didn't just catch Noah's attempted fraud, it revealed his character. I thought about that on the drive home, about rules and systems and the people who view them as either protection or obstacles. Noah had seen compliance as a bottleneck to be eliminated. He never understood that it was actually the foundation everything else stood upon. 3 days later, I accepted Martin's offer, with several conditions that strengthened the compliance department's independence. Within a week, I was back at Stratusforge, rebuilding the team Noah had dismantled. Julian was waiting in my office that first morning back, a hesitant smile on his face. Welcome back, boss. Thank you for doing the right thing, I told him. I know it wasn't easy. He shrugged. Easier than living with the alternative. Noah wanted me to wipe logs from a federal system. That's not something I could do. Not everyone would have stood firm. I had a good example to follow, he said simply. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about what had happened in my absence. Noah had indeed been systematically dismantling the compliance frameworks, replacing thorough processes with superficial checks that wouldn't slow down his aggressive growth targets. When the Penumbra contract, the largest in company history, had been ready for final approval, he had discovered that the Level 1 authentication couldn't be bypassed. In his arrogance, he had attempted to use my credentials, not understanding that the system would detect the timestamp discrepancy and lockdown. When that failed, he had grown increasingly desperate, bringing in outside hackers disguised as consultants to try to break the authentication chain. When even they couldn't crack it, he had ordered Julian to simply delete the evidence of the attempts, the final desperate act that had led to his downfall. 2 months after my return, I received another call from DoD investigator Mercer. I thought you'd want to know, he said. The U.S. attorney has filed charges against Noah Whitaker for attempted fraud in defense contracting. Based on the evidence from your authentication system, they're confident in their case. Will Stratusforge face penalties? I asked, concerned for the company. No, Mercer assured me. Your system created clear evidence that this was an individual action that the company's safeguards correctly prevented. In fact, the DoD is considering recommending your authentication protocols as a best practice for other contractors. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my office, looking out over the Austin skyline. The system I had built had done more than prevent a fraudulent contract approval. It had exposed a fundamental truth about leadership and rules. Noah had once lounged in a conference room and sneered at my belief in compliance. "You still believe in rules, don't you?" he had asked, as if this were a childish naivety I should have outgrown. What he never understood was that I didn't just believe in rules. I understood their power. I knew how to build systems where the rules themselves became a force that couldn't be bullied or charmed or intimidated, where truth was encoded into the very architecture. He had told me that rules were made to be bent. I had shown him that some signatures can't be faked. And in the end, it was the system I built, not me personally, that had brought him down. Sometimes justice doesn't require vengeance. Sometimes it just requires good architecture. He once told me rules were meant to be bent. Now he's learning that a real signature can't be faked. And I'm the last one holding the key.